Today, we're going to be focusing on technology that really makes life fun, so stay tuned. We have with us Colin Godby, CEO and founder at Dust Moto. Dust Moto is building the electric dirt bike the industry wants and needs. They are now taking limited pre-orders for their Hightail, a lightweight, powerful, and effortlessly intuitive electric dirt bike built right here in the USA. So we're going to talk with Colin about what inspires him and what makes the Hightail so much fun. Welcome, Colin.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris.
This looks so cool, and I so desperately, want to be out on one of these right now, riding around. But I guess we'll just have to wait for the pre-orders to get filled first, right?
Yeah, we're getting there.
Yeah, I'm sure. It looks super fun. But before we get into like all that fun, could you talk a little bit about the journey that brought you to create Dust Moto? I mean, because you've had kind of an interesting background, everywhere from, starting off in the world of BMX, which I did, when I was a kid, and to rally racing and all the engineering background you got. Could you just kind of cover, like the journey that brought you to here?
I feel like I'm quite lucky because where we're at with Dust and my role in helping found the business is a bit of an amalgamation of the personal side as well as the professional side of my life.
Right.
And, on the personal side, I grew up in Southern California, kind of exposed to the action sports lifestyle in a lot of ways, as well as standard team sports. I always enjoyed being outside more than inside. And pretty early, I found that I really liked to ride bikes and just explore the neighborhood, that feeling of freedom.
Yeah.
And, even flying, like, especially as a kid, it's as close as you get to feeling like you're flying through the air. And so I discovered that you could actually, kind of compete with BMX. I think right around the 10 years old, I started to do some racing, kind of combined with playing on soccer teams and traveling around Southern California for tournaments and stuff like that. And I guess in parallel with sort of the sport side of things, I started to realize that I was fairly analytically minded, was doing pretty well at math and science, and I like to get into the weeds, understanding how things worked, and sort of that cliche story about a lot of engineers coming from taking things apart and figuring out how to put it back together. And so that, as I went to college at UC Santa Barbara for a mechanical engineering degree, I guess to make the long story short, I didn't quite understand through most of my career what engineers, or my childhood, what engineers did. And it wasn't until basically I had to make a decision about which college to go to and what major to pick that I finally understood that, engineers are the people that help design the things that we use and the objects around us.
Yeah.
And that clicked for me. I said, if someone's going to have the chance to design a bike or, other piece of sports equipment or a car, I want to be that person. So I also kind of on the, entertainment side of things, I'd find myself watching auto racing fairly often, and probably from an early age. You ask the 4-year-old what they want to do when they grow up, is my answer probably would have been race car driver, but I think that evolved into race car engineer. So that kind of was the basis of my outlook, and as I got through my college career, starting to think about what I wanted to do professionally. I, like a lot of people, really wanted to find that balance of things you're interested in and things you're good at. And I managed to find a role coming straight out of college in automotive crash reconstruction. So it was kind of adjacent to automotive design. It was actually figuring out how cars reacted when they'd get crashed. And setting up tests and analyzing the test results.
That's a pretty fun activity there. Like wrecking them and taking them apart and seeing how they, that's a little kid's dream.
Yeah. High speed footage and seeing how it crumples and all this stuff. But I realized pretty quickly, I actually just wanted to do the design side of things. Testing was interesting, but design was really where I wanted to get to. So I I kept an eye out basically for the next best thing that would pop up that would get me into design. And that took me back to Orange County from Santa Barbara and actually into the bicycle industry. And unfortunately, it was a short lived role. I learned a good bit about, kind of being a junior engineer and taking responsibility and how to um, navigate sort of a more open, loose kind of management environment. But I think the silver lining there was it let me find my next role, which was with a company called Millenworks, doing high performance vehicle development. And that was a really fast paced environment where the engineers were adjacent to the shop, and we could really quickly work on a design and take it over to the shop to get built and learn without any, I think, commentary withheld, basically how bad your design was. And so that turned me into a much better engineer than I entered over the course of the 4 years there. And I got a lot of exposure to race car development, to concept cars, theme park rides, and military vehicles. And a good chunk of those projects were actually around electrification and kind of drivetrain, powertrain development. Um, it just so happened that the owner of that business was kind of a legendary rally racer named Rod Millen, Kiwi rally racer. He had done World Rally, short course, off-road stadium trucks, and then Baja. And we still participated in Baja sort of at the business level for fun and kind of marketing. And I ended up developing a friendship with his son Ryan, who's also a professional driver, and that's kind of what got me into being able to do co-driving in Baja and some other rally events. And
Wow.
so it's, yeah, an amazing experience where on the technical side, I'm kind of geeking out about working on these projects, but then on the, personal kind of recreation and entertainment side, just having a ball getting to go to these races and actually participate. And so
That is some really wild stuff. I mean, those rally car driving is a whole nother level of crazy. And I don't know how like, and I know, that your co-driving, so it's like one person, like sort
mhm.
of spouting out this peculiar language of, where the next turns are and how sharp they are and things like that. What I don't understand is how can you be in that car reading those notes and not throw up all over the inside of the car?
No, it's a really good question. And I think at a certain level, you're just sort of genetically, predisposed to handle it or not. I will say I did a couple more traditional rally events where they have a much higher cadence on pace notes and like you said, calling out the features. Off road, like sort of cross country, whether it's Baja or some of the other longer distance rally events, it was a little bit less sort of dense in terms of the notes. So I got some breaks, and it's more about calling out the gotchas or the things to look out for rather than
Right.
specific turn by turn. But no, it was a lot of fun, and got to travel the world to do a little bit of that, and yeah, get to call it my job at a certain level as well. So that was super cool. And I think if I wouldn't have expected to be able to do those things so early in my career, I kind of figured it was something that I'd have to work towards or even never get to do.
Right.
But I think it was, not only in terms of having fun, but also in terms of the professional side. It taught me a lot about developing these vehicles. And while I wasn't doing a lot of design work on these vehicles, I was a part of the field servicing and fixing stuff and being in the pits and
Sure.
seeing how things break and how hard things get beat up and used in sort of the race and off-road environment. And I think it kind of falls into the theme of my career, which has been trying to grab these learnings and tools, so to speak, and add them to the tool belt along the way. And so I got to add a lot of tools to my tool belt kind of early in my career that related to vehicle development and these harsh environments.
What a great background. And I saw something else. I was perusing your LinkedIn, and I saw you also were involved with the Glowforge back in the
Mm-hmm.
day, which I thought was such a cool product. I like just I desperately wanted one of those. I never was
Yeah.
allowed to have one in my house because I don't really have a place to put it. But it was a really cool product. For those who
Yeah.
aren't familiar, do you want to talk a little bit about like what that was?
Yeah, totally. Glowforge super cool. It kind of took an industrial technology and CO2 laser cutting. And if you haven't seen a CO2 laser, it's feels like sci-fi because It's basically a super high voltage arc that's created across a glass tube filled with some plasma gas. It creates a plasma laser, and it looks like this purple, pink sort of laser beam inside of a cool hand blown glass tube, and it shoots across some mirrors and then eventually gets focused to be able to cut through a variety of materials. Um, and that was, a little later in my career, I guess, coming out of Millenworks, jumped into consumer product development, and
Yeah.
especially around startup scene. And it was cool to kind of jump between different types of product companies. And I think there's this trend in my career as it kept going. The technologies of the companies, the products we were offering got more complex and more integrated with software and
Yeah.
hardware and sensing. And so Glowforge, on the end of the complexity scale for consumer product, is at the top. It's got optics and linear motion and laser high power power supplies and
Super
connected to the
cool.
cloud, and all this path planning, super super high tech, and had a lot of fun helping um, on the lead the hardware side of things. So
Yeah.
making sure that the product was ready for consumer market, and also the manufacturing side of things. So we have one in the shop here. Actually, we still use it
Oh,
for some
really?
prototyping tasks. Yeah, it's super helpful for the professional as well as for the consumer side of things.
Super cool product. So, all right. So now you've got this wild background that involves, extreme sports and engineering and, like a lot of adrenaline. Um, could you talk a little bit about like, what you saw that was missing in the dirt bike market and like why you said like, this is the time for an EV dirt bike.
As I was kind of saying, I think Dust is a culmination of kind of these threads of professional and personal coming together. And um, actually, the job we kind of have to roll back to the role previous to Dust. It's a company called Ubco. I was the chief product officer, and we made electric motorbikes, basically these off-road utility two-wheel drive motorbikes, originally designed for New Zealand farms, and then kind of expanded their use case into hunting and ranching and camping and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so within my role there, um, I was tasked with the strategic portfolio, or basically the product roadmap. And so a big piece of my job was actually just expanding my understanding of the industry at large. And that included rolling back sort of into the history of, okay, some of these companies that have tried and failed, what were their products like, what caused them to fail, what were people really excited about on the technology side. Um, what are the new trends coming up within the industry? What should we look at jumping onto? And we started to put together basically the basis of an idea for a product adjacent to the utility bike, which is more recreationally oriented. And we had started to see some trends with these low cost, lighter weight e-moto bikes coming from Asia, as well as sort of some companies trying and continuing to try the really high performance side of the spectrum.
Right.
And in my role there, obviously I had to try some of these competitive bikes and these other bikes that have been around. And you know, from BMX to getting older, I continued into two-wheel recreation. I kept racing mountain bikes and got to a decently high level. And one of my frustrations, like having ridden dirt bikes as well, but never very seriously in terms of competition, I always felt like my skill set on bicycles did not fully translate into dirt bikes. Like as a better rider on bicycles, then I get on a dirt bike and I was kind of like a goon. And then as a part of my role at Upco, I jumped on some of these benchmark bikes or these competitor bikes, and all of a sudden I had this moment where it clicked. Was I'm a much better rider on the electric motos than I have ever been on gas bikes, and there's something about the user experience being much simpler,
Yeah.
and basically it lowers the barrier of entry of learning how to ride and even just ride well, and lets you kind of focus on just the act of riding rather than juggling all these hand and foot controls. And so that was kind of, why EV dirt bikes or electric dirt bikes was sort of this realization in my previous role that there are some trends and market opportunities, this accumulation of knowledge of what has failed and why, and why I think there's still a really unique opportunity because of the nature of the experience that electric provides to actually grow the industry. And basically, the root of it is power sports has been flat essentially, especially dirt bike sales for the last 25 years. And we kind of developed this realization that it's really coupled with the lack of innovation in terms of the user experience. And by offering electric, all of a sudden we could get a lot more people onto these bikes. And so while we weren't able to see that through at Ubco, it gave myself and my other two founders who I worked with there the opportunity to start fresh and say, okay, there's this gap in the market around kind of a performance middle size, middle market bike, sort of where price to performance is maximized. Almost like the Dyson vacuum in a way.
Right.
There's higher end products than a Dyson vacuum, but you don't get much more performance, basically, right?
Right.
But then if you go down market, you actually pretty quickly trade performance and reliability for a cheaper product. So
Right.
there's there's this opportunity to slot in at that performance middle market, develop a real brand based on American kind of insights and understanding. In the reality, there's no American dirt bike company right now
Wow.
servicing our big market. So that was the why. It was like right in the middle of it. Saw the very visceral connection with the product, and then also had the insights in our role. Having to understand the rest of the industry and seeing that there's a gap there.
When I look at the Hightail, the thing that's like really appealing to me is like it doesn't seem like it's a lot of like sometimes you get into a sport and it becomes such a the maintenance and care and feeding of your activity gets to be more of the hobby than the hobby itself. And this doesn't seem like that. This seems like, this thing's going to be ready. You just slap a battery in and you just get on it and go and you have fun and then you come back and you pack it away and rinse and repeat, right? So
Yeah.
it really seems like, from sort of the modern busy lifestyle that this is a really good, thing to integrate into that.
Yeah. There's sort of an insight that was pulled up from one of our colleagues pretty early on when we're working in this concept space, which is like time is the most precious resource that we have. And the last thing you want to be doing when you're trying to partake in a hobby is spend more time sort of servicing the hobby or the item than actually doing. And I think that's what a lot of the ownership experience of a typical gas dirt bike is like, especially if you have
For
a
sure.
family.
For
Because
sure.
it's like, okay, if my bike's not broken, then one of the kids' bikes or the wife's bike's broken. And then it's like, okay, we're never really getting out, or the riding opportunities are farther from home because they shut them down due to noise. And then the other side, like you said, is sort of flip the switch and go. Like in a lot of these situations, you turn on the gas bike and you discover something. Oh, dang it, I need to change the air filter or whatever. It's like the lawnmower like finally comes out of the shed after a winter, and you're like getting ready with the
It
grass growing in
just doesn't
spring, and
start.
it doesn't work, and you're like, oh. And so that's why everyone's moved to these electric power tools,
I
right?
have
It's
both
just
a
it works.
lawnmower and a snowblower like that.
Yeah. Exactly. So you don't do anything with them, right? and
Yeah.
and you end up getting out the hand shovel to clear the walk.
Yeah, totally. Well, and I remember when I was younger and we used to ride dirt bikes and things, it was every time something it's like, oh, the clutch lever's broken, or oh, the brake lever's broken, or the brake pedal is just bent,
Hmm. Hmm.
unnaturally. For some reason, it doesn't start today. Who knows why? It could be
Hmm.
water in the tank. It could be an air filter. It could be anything. It's like, it just seems like every time we wanted to do something, it required so much effort just to get out there.
Yeah, and we had really similar experiences, and so the value proposition for electric is kind of a combination of those elements around maintenance, a big reduction in the part count and the types of ongoing service that's needed. The other piece is related to the learning curve. Much easier to learn on electric because you're not juggling clutches and gear shifts and foot brakes. It's
Right.
all more intuitive, a lot like riding a bicycle just with a throttle. And the other piece is the availability of the riding opportunities. Back in the 60s, 70s, 80s is sort of the golden era of dirt biking, because as the country was starting to kind of build the network of roads and communities and stuff like that, we basically were able to have kind of these suburban areas with dirt lots and backyard tracks and all this stuff, sort of semi-rural, semi-suburban. And as things kind of got more and more dense through the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, there's a lot more like NIMBYism, or like, let's get rid of these dirt bike tracks because they're loud and annoying, and I get it. So that's kind of the third piece of, the improved value or improved experience value proposition for electric for sure.
Yeah, we were always being chased out of somewhere, that's for sure. Well, one thing that I think is interesting, so, I'll let you kind of describe the Hightail, but, one of the things I think is interesting about it too is that it's kind of customizable. Like the riding experience is also customizable. Like,
Mhm.
you can either be super aggressive or not as aggressive. So it can fit a lot of different styles and skill levels too, which is really interesting. But I mean,
Yeah.
maybe you could, kind of talk through, like what goes into the Hightail and what that experience is all like.
What's interesting about the electric side of things is, some of this kind of comes for free to a certain extent. When you have a digital control system, electric vehicles naturally have this. You have a lot more access to the various sensors and data, and you can use that in a variety of ways. So in a gas vehicle, especially older ones that might be carbureted or don't have very advanced kind of electronic control units, you're sort of fixed on like, okay, throttle input goes directly to output, right? With our digital control systems, electric, you could do everything from, mapping the shape of the throttle input to how much torque is allowed, changing the power based on battery levels. You can go in reverse or forward. Like there's a lot of interesting things that you can do. And so while I think it's worth saying we're not unique in this in terms of an electric vehicle platform, I think we can use our sensibilities around product development, product design to apply this in the way that's best for our customers. So, customizable rider modes where you can have a learner mode, which is nearly impossible to, sort of wheelie over or
So you don't dump
lose
the
control.
clutch and flip it over.
Yeah, exactly. Loop it out. Or, this is sort of I love this phrase, whiskey throttle, which is like a lot of people, if you give it a little too much throttle, there's this positive feedback loop in the sense of throttle makes you go backwards, which makes you pull more on your throttle hand, which gives you more throttle. And it just, all of a sudden
Yep.
you're going 100 miles an hour and you can't stop. So we could have ride modes that just totally prevents that. Right.
Right.
And then at the same time, it can be sort of this Jekyll Hyde type of situation where in our highest mode, the bike can be, a true ripping machine for an advanced rider and get out on tracks and hit big jumps and accelerate like some of the larger gas bikes. And so
Right.
it's a really cool opportunity where you can teach someone to ride, and I've literally done this even with our prototypes. Teach someone to ride in the matter of a couple minutes, see them having a huge smile on their face because it's the first time they've ever ridden a motorcycle and felt that sensation. And at the same, and then have them come back, let their friend jump on who's an experienced rider but never ridden electric, jump on, open up all the available power, and then they have a huge smile because the feeling of an electric vehicle feels like magic, and it's
Yeah.
the same for people jumping into a EV car for the first time.
They're
It just
fast.
feels,
A
yeah,
lot of torque.
exactly. The other thing side of the experience I think that we're working to offer, which allows for that approachability and rider kind of designed experiences, actually just what you might call the passive features. So just the size itself is unique to our bike. If you take a typical gas bike kind of size range, it's usually matched to engine output.
Mhm.
But once you get to a certain point in the modern era, a 125cc bike and a 250cc bike and a 450cc bike and a 500, they all are the same basic seat height
Right.
and roughly wheelbases. So like it's not like you're getting small, medium, large. You're just changing the horsepower output and torque.
And the weight.
We and the weight exactly. And so we saw the opportunity actually maybe fine tune the sizing, make it about 2 inches shorter on the seat height, a little bit shorter on the wheelbase, create a more kind of nimble, agile riding experience, but also allow for a wider range of riders to feel comfortable on the bike in terms of being able to throw a leg over it and touch the ground.
Yeah.
And so we've had riders from 5'2" to 6'4" be able to jump on and have a lot of fun on the bike. And while, yeah, it's not necessarily the right um, format for winning the highest echelon of races, but it is the right equation in our eyes for having the most fun. And kind of back to that, we're short on time. Like, let's design an experience that doesn't waste time having fun. Like, let's get to the fun faster.
Yeah, well, and I know, like, the other advantage of electric is it's just fewer parts. So it's, like we talked through this kind of a little bit lower maintenance, but I mean, can you talk about, how like that plays out in sort of the design and engineering of this bike?
It gives us a bit more flexibility around how we how we package things. We have fewer subsystems. We don't have in our bike. This is an air cooled system. We don't have coolant loops and radiators and hoses to deal with there. Um, we don't have exhaust pipes that are
Did you burn
potentially
yourself on?
burning. Yeah, exactly.
I've got
Potentially
scars on
burning.
my legs from those.
That's right. Yeah, everyone does. And then we can also look at sort of the overall aesthetic of it, right? A lot of motorcycle design is sort of shrink wrapping around all of these unique to gas bike features and parts. So, in simplifying the system, it's great for maintenance, it's great for packaging density, being able to get things really tightly packaged, but also it gave us more flexibility to make a bike um, that looks a little bit more, I think, it's a mashup of kind of consumer product, automotive, and bicycle design more than traditional dirt bike
Right,
design. And in the sense, like, we're not race first, we're more about having fun. We want a product that looks really appealing and fast, but at the same time maybe a bit more sophisticated and clean and modern. And so we've got this new palette that's our electric components, battery and a motor, and then the ability to kind of make these surfaces cleaner without exhaust pipes and radiators and all this stuff.
yeah, it's a beautiful looking bike too. I mean, I think that's another thing about it. The aesthetic of it is very cool too.
Yeah, we saw that opportunity to differentiate there too, which is like, hey, if we're coming with a little bit more flexibility here, let's make it look nice. But there's this fine line in making those decisions around. We want to be able to sell our motorcycles to existing enthusiasts as well as new riders, right?
Right,
And so we've seen other companies come in and they swing too hard towards like this new customer innovation, and it's a polarizing design for existing riders. They're like, that does not
right.
look like a dirt bike. And we saw that and we were able to learn from that and said, okay, how about we make something that looks like a real dirt bike, looks fast, looks fun, and then it also looks clean for maybe an audience that wouldn't typically be drawn to a standard dirt bike. So, and
Yeah,
that's kind of where we see the big opportunity for the industry too is, and we talked about this kind of static growth kind of position the industry's in, is we've got to bring new people into it, and we can do that through an easier experience and learning curve. It's a naturally fun thing to do. That feeling of flying, the flow state that you enter, it's really desirable. um, so if we can get people liking the look of the product, able to learn it quickly, not having huge headaches in owning it or maintaining it, all of a sudden we think we can help tip up that growth curve.
yeah. I think that what's cool about it is, and what you're talking about. I think in terms of like sort of the design and the aesthetic of it, is sort of embracing the nostalgia of the past, kind of, you know, thing that was so fun and great that we all enjoyed, but just bringing it into like a more modern sensibility, so that you're still connected to the whole history of it.
That's one thing that we want to be really good about, is we don't want to be coming, from outside the industry saying we're here to revolutionize the industry and everything you loved about it is dead,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Like, we actually, I look fond, like, I grew up in Southern California and was surrounded by motocross tracks and these pro riders, and it it's such a rich and passionate kind of culture and community and fan base. And there's a lot of great stuff about that. Like, you go to these races, these national amateur races, and there are thousands of families, camping for the weekend. Kids are outdoors, swimming in the rivers, and then racing and giving it their all and getting hurt and learning grit and all this stuff. It's a really rich community that we want to help keep going. We don't want to come in and say, like, throw all of that away because now is the future.
Right.
Um, but at the same time, the external perspective that we can bring could maybe help in other ways, like bring new riders into the sport to help the overall ecosystem thrive. The more new riders entering races or buying gear or, going to rental experiences, that's good for everyone that's in the industry. And I think one thing that we can help do with our product is actually create a bridge into, actively participating at a deeper level. And so I wouldn't be surprised if people that come into the sport through a product like ours actually end up buying gas bikes eventually. But it is pretty clear looking at the data that any new rider, any kid that's starting under sort of 15 years old, they're all starting on electric.
Yeah.
So,
Obviously, there are unique challenges that you're going to have because one of the things we talked about when we were talking earlier was like the benefit of an electric bike is that it doesn't make
mhm,
noise, but that's also potentially a big problem because you don't hear somebody
mhm,
coming, right? So there's unique challenges to the industry. Could you talk about
mhm,
like some of the technology you've had to develop and some of the
mhm.
kind of unique challenges you've had to overcome, for the EV.
There's probably a whole segment on the difference between like electric street bikes and electric dirt bikes,
Right.
and the noise is a big piece of that, right? And kind of comfort on roads and all these sorts of things. But kind of more specifically to our application, I think some of the biggest challenges are with the current state of battery technology are always going to be range.
Mhm.
Um, and you can't right now, sort of the best comparison is when you factor in sort of the 2.5 to 3x improvement in efficiency of an electric system against the lack of energy density against the gasoline of gallon of gasoline, you end up basically at this sort of like 1/20th the energy content in a same volume.
Right.
And it's a so it's a big difference. And so that means you have roughly 2 gallons of gas. You make a battery that big, and you're going to go, sort of 1/10 or 1/20th the range. And so there's a big piece of the industry that have expectations around, okay, I want to get out for 6 hours of riding. And you simply can't do that on most electric bikes, depending on how you're riding, especially at high speeds
Right.
where the efficiency falls off pretty fast, right? And so street bikes that are on the highway doing 70, 80 miles an hour are really tough to get you electric range, because a motorcycle has worse aerodynamics than a car.
Right.
Um, and and then dirt bikes that are in the desert going 100 miles an hour, trying to cover 200 miles or something in a race is also really hard. So for us, we kind of said, let's lean into the benefits to find the right compromise on these limitations. And so for us, making it about fun and more about like the 1 to 2 hour sort of experience set, which is like an after work ride, or playing in the backyard with your family, or getting to the track and maybe having this as a second bike for fun.
If it's more reliable and you can just count on it being ready to go, you don't have to be like, I'm going to spend all week working on the bike and then I'm going to definitely get 6 to 7 hours of riding on this weekend.
That's right. Yeah.
You can kind of do it a little bit every day.
That's exactly right. Like, get the wiggles out, we like to say, is like, yeah, even just getting 30 minutes of riding does a lot. Like, that flow state really
Yeah.
is great for the brain, and it's fun to, be able to twist the throttle and throw a little dirt. And so if you do that a couple times, 2 to 3 times a week rather than one big ride every couple weeks, that's a piece of it. The other side around how we kind of compromised or found the right equation is thinking about swappable batteries.
Hmm.
So one thing we've done in our design is allowing for a swappable, removable battery, so that if people really did want more ride time, they could invest in a second battery pack, so that they could keep going. But what we're trying to find is the balance of the typical kind of rider and experience, they're looking for. We meet that and their physical capabilities. So it's like, if you're pushing really hard and you're getting a really kind of hardcore 45-minute ride, your body's feeling that workout.
Yeah.
Or if you're going at a kind of more chill pace and you go 2.5 hours, you feel really stoked on that experience as well.
So let's dig into that a little bit. Like, who would you say this is built for? Like who's like your prime market for this bike?
It's sort of three different pillars, we like to say, and we actually refined this idea and understanding of our potential market through our early crowdfund campaign that we hosted called Founders 50. And basically, we gave the opportunity for 50 people in a really early stage of building the business to jump on, crowdfund the business, and get bikes basically for half off. And it was pretty unique because typically in like a Kickstarter, a lot of times you give your money and then you just sort of wait and hold on, and maybe get an email once every, 3 or 6 months.
Yeah.
We said, let's actually invite these people along the journey every month. We actually host a Google meeting with all of them if they want to join. We tell them about the updates, the design choices we're making, what's new, what we're learning, even also about the business, not just the product, like how we're building the business and
Yeah.
fundraising and stuff like that. And what we learned from that audience was is kind of three distinct groups. The first group was existing e-moto customers buying some of these lower cost bikes and getting into upgrading,
Mm,
and they were excited about the Hightail because we sort of had taken the performance level, like we talked about, kind of finding that optimization of price to performance, and found a point where if we met our goals in terms of our performance targets, it's a much better value and experience than trying to upgrade these existing low cost bikes.
interesting.
And so we were kind of the logical next phase of improvement for them in their ownership journey. The second category were existing dirt bikers that were interested in sort of adding to the quiver of bikes.
Right.
And they liked the idea of a more playful, kind of nimble backyard track and single track type of bike rather than um, us trying to tell them they got to replace their big gas bike because, we're better than it all. And so these are people that were interested in electric, not anti electric,
Right.
but maybe not fully committing, to throwing away all the gas bikes. And then the third category is probably more similar to me personally, and our general kind of founding position, which was the action sports enthusiasts that were adjacent to moto, had some time probably at one point in time in life to jump on a dirt bike, had fun, but never got into the sport,
Right.
and finally realizing that there might be the product equation or the product offering that would get them into the sport, with the right sort of level of features and design and brand behind it.
That's awesome. Well, all right. So you're taking pre-orders on this. I mean, if somebody wanted to get in on that, where's the best place to go to put their pre-order in?
www.dustmoto.com is our primary website. We are running pre-orders through there. You can sign up. $100 refundable deposit basically gets your spot in line. We're looking to fulfill those production pre-orders towards the end of this year as we ramp production through the summer. And if you want to consume some of the information about us, one of the things we've been working really hard to do from the beginning of the company in 2023 is actually just be very open about the development process and our journey. And so our Instagram channel at Dust.moto, and our YouTube channel Dust Moto, and as well as our newsletter that you can sign up for on our website. There's a lot of information out there about us. Like, we're basically an open book, so you can go as deep as you want.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like $100 worth of value just there.
Yeah, no, it's exactly right. And we are committed to delivering value to our backers and our followers and stuff like that. And so even the content we try to push out, we really try to go that next level deeper, and explaining what we're doing and why. And we saw that missing when we were starting the company. And in fact, we looked to see if we could learn from any of them, and this kind of content wasn't out there, right? So we said, let's share the journey, and we're sure to find kind of passionate people out there.
Well, and I think that's the sort of new trend now, is sort of build in public, because it keeps you honest to your mission, it keeps you honest to your vision, and it keeps you in the feedback loop with the people you're trying to produce products for.
That's right. Yeah. The best way to learn is to just be in and amongst our customers. And even with our prototypes, like having the opportunity to show them. A lot of companies are really precious about their prototypes, and they feel uncomfortable showing the flaws or the issues. And we've had to develop some sort of thick skin to just show kind of all of the good and the bad. But
Yeah.
to your point, like, the learning has been invaluable, and it's really shaped our production specification, and shaped how we're launching this thing, and even who we partner with when it comes to go to market, and our retail partners and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, it looks super cool. I can't wait to, see this thing in reality, and see how you go, as a company, and what you build. And obviously this is the starting point for something much bigger. So congratulations on what you're doing. Congratulations on getting to this point, and keep up the good work, because I think the world needs more fun these days.
It's so true. Yeah. What's the antidote to our crazy, complex lives? I think getting on the motorcycle is one of the best ones. And so appreciate it. Definitely been a lot of fun. And the journey's, building a business from scratch, especially this kind of products, not easy, but we're excited to keep charging forward with the backing of some awesome customers, and a lot more fun to come. That's for sure.
Well, keep building the products I love. That's all you got to do.
Awesome. Will do.
All right. Thanks so much. Thanks for watching. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. And if you could, give us a like, share this with a friend, and I will see you in the next one.